Hi, I'm Ben with Teleport, and today I'm going to be walking you through our getting started with Kubernetes access. Okay, let's dive straight in. So throughout this tutorial, we're going to set up Teleport. It's going to be deployed within a Kubernetes cluster, and it will provide SSO access using GitHub, and I'll show you how Teleport can be used to record all Kubectl machines of your developers. So to get started, we're going to install Teleport in the Kubernetes cluster, set up single sign-on using GitHub, and I'll give a quick demo of how you can sort of capture and play back Kubernetes commands. A few prerequisites before we get started. You'll need a Kubernetes cluster. You can set this up on Minikube locally. I'm going to be using EKS, which is Amazon's hosted Kubernetes service. There's a few options for setting this up. I found eksctl to be the most reliable for creating and destroying instances quickly. So since this takes about 20 minutes to run, I'm going to kick this off now. So I'm choosing eksctl create. You might need to install eksctl on your local machine, create the cluster. It just has a simple name, it's one node, and it's in the US West region. Okay, so as that fires off, I'll go through a few other prerequisites. Something else, you'll also need Helm installed on the local machine. On my machine, I already have Helm installed, version 3.5.3. For people who aren't familiar, Helm is a package manager for Kubernetes. We provide pre-built Helm charts that lets you get up and running very quickly. These are available on charts.releases.teleport.dev. They're also available in our GitHub repo, so if you want to modify them and integrate them to your application, or if you have your own flow, you can check out our Git repo, which is and it's under examples, charts, and these are all of the charts that are also publicly available on charts.releases. So yeah, we have at least 3.5.1, and you need Kubectl installed. Kubectl is a command line tool which most people should be familiar with if you've used Kubernetes before. So version, okay, it's trying to get my version of my cluster, which I'll be setting up next. Okay, so the first step is we're going to install Teleport. To install Teleport, we're going to add the Helm chart, and then we're going to install it, but we need to wait for our cluster to finish provisioning. Looks like we're still waiting for this stack to complete, so I'm going to come back in about 20 minutes and pick this up then. Okay, we're back. Everything has been set up. One of the benefits of eksctl is it does a few things. You can see it saved a kubeconfig. This kubeconfig is going to give me access to the EKS cluster it's just created. It's added all of the IAM roles and permissions, and you can see here it should work if I do kubectl get nodes. It's getting this US West 2 EC2 host, just been up 68 seconds, and it's deployed on version 1.18.9. Okay, so let's dive into the rest of the tutorial. So first up, we're going to add this Helm repo. This is going to add it locally, and then I'm going to run these commands with kubectl. It's already installed, as I've already run this, so it's going to just skip this. The next thing we need to do is we're going to install a single node Teleport cluster, provision Acme certificates with this flag. But there's a few things we need to change here. All of this is fine. We're going to install Teleport cluster chart, namespace Teleport cluster, cluster name. This is important because this is going to be the public endpoint and IP address, and we're going to later set this up for DNS. So in my case, I'm going to set this up as K8 EKS demo.asteroid.earth, which is the custom domain name I have for most of my demos, and Acme email is needed because we're using Let's Encrypt. Okay. So just give this a second, and it has been deployed. All right, next steps. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to use an external load balancer and create a public IP that we're going to access. So first I'm going to set the context to teleport cluster namespace. And then get the service. And if I just extend this a bit, you can see that we have teleport cluster as load balancer, as cluster IP, has this really long external IP address. And then we have these ports that have been opened. Okay, let me resize this. So the next thing we need to do is, we have instructions here on getting the IP address. This might be if you're using like Minikube or something, but it can be helpful. If I actually run this command, I won't get anything, but if I change it to host name, or maybe it's external IP, host name, and then I echo my IP, it's going to be my IP address is the host name. So I'm going to go to my DNS provider, which is Google Domains, and create a DNS record for this URL. We have instructions here which says how you can create this with, so let's say GCP Cloud DNS or Route 53. This is very helpful because you can quickly do this in the command line. In my case, I'm going to set the simple demo. I'm just going to be sort of click ops in it. So if I go back, as you remember, I created the Helm chart with K8-EKS demo. And it's a C name. Copy this. Okay, so I've updated this record that I previously had. This is going to take 48 hours to propagate, but I found it takes less time. So we have this option here. So the first request will take a bit longer, also because it gets from Let's Encrypt. So we have this web ping API endpoint. I come here, K8 demo. Let me just check and make sure I'm using the right URL. And you'll see that nothing is connecting. So let me just check HTTPS. This sort of thing. So this is kind of where it comes in helpful to use this curl web API endpoint. And then it is web API ping. And so I can't resolve it. So no need to worry. Most of this is either waiting for DNS to propagate or it's waiting to get the certificates. So I have found the easiest way to just double check things is come in here. It's going to hit this URL. And you see now it's kind of thinking a bit more. Color again. And this may take it a little bit. Okay, it's great. So now you can see that it has returned that everything has been set up. So now if I go here, I have signed in with Teleport. Okay, great. So now we can move on to the next step. So we're going to create a local admin. Let me just close this window. So local admin is going to be a local user, which is a sort of a fallback in case the SSO provider is down. In my case, I have this example here of Alice. He's going to be a system masters. So the first thing we need to do is create a member.yaml. Okay, let me just create a new. So here we just have created a new YAML file, which is a member. You also need to keep this SSH value for login. It's sort of a non-empty random value, and we're going to add the group's Kubernetes masters. Okay, so we created the role. The next thing we do is we need to run our tool tctl against the pod that's running teleport. So first off, we need to find out which pod is running teleport. So we use kubectl get pod teleport cluster, and so if we do echo pod, you can see this is the pod that we have, and now we can create the role. So what we're doing here is we're kubectl execing, we use tctl create, and we're using the local file member to create the member. And then the next stage is we're going to create the user. In our example, we have Alice. I'm going to just change this to just my name. And now we have this URL that we can visit and register this user. So next up, we're going to register. And I'm going to use Google Authenticator. There's a range of OTP providers that you can use. Okay, so now I'm in Teleport. I'm in this default servers page. So we have servers, applications. There's nothing here, no activity, nothing is sort of happening. So the next step is one of the reasons for this is Teleport doesn't provide a Kubernetes interface yet. Everything is done through the command line. So next up, we need to install Teleport locally. I think I already have it locally on my machine. The flow is the same. You can go to our install documentation. Here's the instructions if you're setting up on Linux. So I'm on my local machine on Pop OS. Just check. So I actually have a 6.1.0. This is fine for our environment. And so we're going to try to log in using TSH login with a local user. We're going to use a custom kubeconfig to prevent overwriting the default one in case there was a problem. So, and here we need to update this to the URL of the cluster. We still need port 443, and Alice has changed her name to Ben. And I'm picking the password that I previously selected and the OTP token. And you can see here I have a range of clusters, but I'm going to scroll straight to the top. You can see here we have the URL of the Teleport cluster, logged in as Ben. I have the role member. This login, keep this value here is just sort of for legacy reasons. Kubernetes is enabled. We have one cluster, and I have the role Kubernetes system masters. So you can see next up we can use TSH to list which clusters I'm connected. We have this one cluster here. I'm going to log in. So now I've logged in, and you can see it's selected. So once working, we remove the kubeconfig. So I'm going to get cluster pods, and now this is now using the kubeconfig that have been downloaded from TSH. So actually, if I come in here, I'm going to set up the audit log next. Okay, but let's keep going with the SSO. Okay, so next up, we're going to set up the SSO for Kubernetes users. And we're going to be using, there's a few options for open source users. You can use GitHub. Enterprise, we have a range of either OIDC or SAML providers that you can do a deeper dive into. But for community users, you want to be using our GitHub SSO. So I have another GitHub org, which is called Proxy.io. This is just an example org that I use for testing. And if I come down here, I'm going to create a new OAuth app. So it's under settings, applications. Okay, Wednesday. Okay, so here you can see we have this redirect URL. This is going to be the URL of the teleport cluster to start, but we're using v1 web API callback. So there's a few things here. So let's put this into a sort of scratch pad so we can work through it together. So this is going to be another YAML file. Client ID, this is the one that we should be able to obtain from here. And we need to create the secret. Tell my organization, so I'm going to be using my YubiKey here. Okay, YubiKey to the rescue. So next up we have the secret. Add the secret in. And this is the display. It's going to display as GitHub. We have this redirect URL. This is the URL that we already put into GitHub itself. And this is this URL. It's important to add 443. And then lastly, we're going to map GitHub teams to teleport roles. My organization is called practice-io. And I have a team admin. And I'm going to add anyone who's in the admin role to have access to the pre-built-in access role. And I'm going to also add them the auditor role so they can see the logs. So I am going to create this file, github.yaml. Okay, everything looks pretty good. So we're going to do the same thing again. I'm going to just set my current context. So the current context is the, see, this is a very long URL, but it's the URL of the context itself. I'm going to get the pod for where teleport is running. Same pod as before. And I'm going to use Kubectl exec to create GitHub. So teleport 6 uses teams to logins to the reference role. Mapping the organization is not found. Let me just double check the mappings here. Likely picked the wrong team name. Okay, I actually have it. My team is actually called admins. Okay, so here there's just an issue with the YAML formatting. Like all things, you would check your YAML formatting, but so I'm going to add logins, access, and auditor. And just going to apply this. So now when I go to my cluster, you can see I have this sign in with GitHub button. So I click this. I Actually, if you go back to the GitHub, you can also add a custom icon, make it sort of fancy, but I'm going to authorize this application, and now I have access to the cluster. And since I added the auditor role, you can see that all of these Kubernetes requests have also been captured. And then in here, you can see the request path, what was happening. And it's a very helpful way to sort of take your whole team and see which members of the team are running which kubectl commands. Okay, so that brings me to the end. There's a few information out here about debugging SSO. You can kubectl exec, tail the logs. And you can see what's happening. It's quite verbose though. And in this audit log, you can see I've been running these commands and you see these requests, but you also want to sometimes, if you're doing interactive kubectl execs, I'm going to create a pod to kubectl exec into and show you how teleport records that activity. So this is a great place to get started for running a shell into a container. We're going to be using this shell demo to just show this off for you. So check it's running. Okay, now it's running. And now I have created a shell inside the container. And we sometimes hear some of our customers saying like kubectl exec is the new sort of SSH. And so here we can see a few things inside this container. We have a few sort of entry points. And let's just run an update just so we can create some activity on this host. Taking tools like tcddump to do some debugging. Ooh, turn this. Okay, and as this is running, and then for any interactive kubectl execs, you can come in here and you can see that we have the node, which is the name of the cluster, the pod, and then the shell demo. If I play this, you can see the same commands I ran on the terminal are also replayed here, which can be very helpful for debugging to see what happened during a session. Okay, so that brings me to the end of getting started with teleport running inside the Kubernetes cluster. If you're interested in learning more, we have a few next steps. You can connect multiple clusters. We have set up CI/CD access, federate access using our trusted clusters feature, and also adding SSO. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below, or you can email me, ben@goteleport.com. Thank you.